This is the third suicide in just 2 weeks. The whole town feels really heavy and scared right now. I'm Thomas, the psychologist sent to assist with the investigation. Please accept my sincere condolences.
My son was fine, I swear it. That stupid game is to blame.
Thomas, the victim was playing SHIN Sonic right before they died. No drugs were discovered at the scene.
I want to sue the game company.
Please try to calm down, ma'am. We will definitely investigate thoroughly and give you and the families of the other victims a satisfactory answer.
None of the victims had a history of depression, and they weren't connected in any way. The only thing they had in common was this Sonic game.
I don't believe in stuff like curses. I've done some preliminary research on this game, and look at this. The purple and yellow color palette keeps players feeling trapped, and the sound effects that go above 85 Hz increase feelings of anxiety and fear. This game is using imagery and sound that's way too intense for a horror game.
Yeah, especially that VHS tape. The scream is so real, it's creepy. Can you help me put together a more detailed report?
Sure, I'll download the game and give it a try. I went home and started downloading the game. Creating an account was easy. I started playing at 10 p.m. I tried to finish the game as fast as possible. I was determined to uncover the mystery behind it. But things weren't as simple as I thought. Once I started playing, the game kept pushing me to complete tasks at all hours of the day. I haven't been able to sleep properly for 2 days, and tonight was no exception. It's 3:02 a.m, and because I was 2 minutes late for a task, the game gave me a jump scare as punishment. That creepy VHS clip woke me right up. It's a way to manipulate players into always being ready for the next task. The third night, I was so stressed and tired that I couldn't sleep. My subconscious was constantly reminding me of the game tasks. I knew it was a bad sign. And then, the game task appeared. As I waited for it to load, I quickly noted the time. The timing of these tasks is so weird. There's no pattern. It's like the game's sole purpose is to keep players awake and punish them for not following the rules. Suddenly, Sonic's terrifying scream came from my neighbor's house, followed by a weak cry for help. I ran over there right away. I burst into my neighbor's house, and the sight in front of me was horrifying. My neighbor, usually a healthy guy, looked like he was having a heart attack, and next to him was his phone, playing Sonic's scream. I rushed over, laid him down, and turned off the sound. The room was quiet, and I could feel my heart rate and my neighbors slowing down. I called an ambulance. While I was waiting, a thought hit me. My neighbor's cry and Sonic's scream kept echoing in my head, and they sounded strangely similar. Could Sonic's scream be a death sound, or was it a cry for help? A cry for help from Ethan. Just then, the paramedics arrived and took my neighbor away. I wasn't needed there anymore. Willis, I've found a crucial clue. Can you check if there's anyone named Ethan at Company X? Sure enough, my guess was right. After getting Ethan's file, Willis and I went straight to Company X.
Ethan lives alone in this town. He's a game programmer and lives at Company X. No one has seen him leave the company for 6 months.
Or maybe he couldn't leave. We finally arrived at Company X. Hopefully, we won't leave empty-handed.
I wonder what brings you here so suddenly, officer.
Nothing much. Just a report of a missing employee named Ethan. I thought I'd check it out.
The moment he heard the name Ethan, I saw a look of panic on the CEO's face. Suddenly, Willis's dog started barking loudly. It was barking at a life-sized animatronic. The barking was unusual. I had a feeling he'd found something.
I'm sorry, officer, but we don't allow pets inside.
Sorry, I'll take him outside. You don't seem surprised to find a body in that robot, Mr. CEO.
I don't know anything about it.
Mr. X, you're a suspect in Ethan's death. Come with us to the station.
At 8 a.m. this morning, the CEO of the famous game company known for the SHIN Sonic game was arrested on charges of manslaughter and concealing a body. Ethan, an employee who was the main developer of the Sonic character, was forced to work 16 hours a day for 3 months straight. Eventually, he suffered a heart attack and collapsed at his desk. But the company's crimes don't end there. The company used Ethan's dying image and his desperate cries as the source material for the Sonic character to make the game more realistic. Ethan's body was hidden inside an animatronic displayed in the company's main lobby.
The toxic content, images, and sounds in the game are a major factor contributing to the psychological decline of players and have been linked to recent mysterious suicides. I urge viewers to avoid watching, storing, or sharing these harmful videos in any form. Just keep calm, babe.
I woke up with a sharp pain shooting through my back and shoulders. My entire body felt like it had been through a fight, but I couldn't remember anything unusual happening during the night. As I struggled to sit up, I noticed the dark bruises blooming across my skin. I had no memory of falling or hurting myself in any way. "Stephen!" I called out, my voice trembling. He rushed into the bedroom, concern etched on his face.
What's wrong?
He asked, his eyes scanning over the bruises on my arms. I showed him the marks. "Look at this. Did something happen last night? I don't remember anything." Stephen looked just as puzzled as I felt.
No, nothing happened. I was right here beside you the entire night. Are you sure you didn't fall out of bed or something?
I shook my head, feeling more confused than ever. I hadn't moved from the bed, that much I knew. Stephen helped me get dressed and we decided it was time to see a doctor. The doctor ordered a full set of tests, checking everything from my blood pressure to potential vitamin deficiencies. When the results came back, everything appeared normal, except for one thing.
You tested positive for nitrazepam.
The doctor said, frowning at the report in his hands. That can't be right. I've never taken any kind of sedative in my life.
Are you sure? It's a strong drug, typically used to treat severe insomnia or anxiety. You haven't been prescribed anything like that?
I shook my head, my mind reeling. No, doctor. I wouldn't take anything like that without knowing. He looked concerned but didn't press further. When I got home, I saw a small pile of papers on the table. Stephen had left some of his things scattered about after sorting through bills and documents the other day. Then something caught my eye. A prescription slip, crumpled slightly at the edges. My breath hitched in my throat as I picked it up and read the name. Stephen. For a moment, I felt a pang of concern. Could Stephen be struggling with some kind of ill? Why he hadn't told me? Maybe he'd been suffering in silence, trying not to worry me. But why? Curiosity gnawed at me, and I decided to search online for more information about the drug. As I read through the details, my heart began to pound harder. The dosage prescribed to Stephen was far higher than what was typically recommended for mild insomnia. It was the kind of dose that could knock someone out completely. The most surprising thing to me was that the main ingredient of the drug was nitrazepam. An unsettling thought crept into my mind. Could Stephen have done this? Was he drugging me? The idea seemed absurd, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The way he had looked at me this morning, calm, almost too calm, left a knot of unease in my stomach. I sat there staring at the screen, my thoughts spiraling into darker places. Was I just being paranoid, or was something far more sinister happening right under my nose? That night, as Stephen handed me my usual cup of chamomile tea, I hesitated. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting for me to take a sip. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced a smile and took the cup. But instead of drinking it, I waited until he left the room and poured it down the sink. I knew then that I needed proof. something to confirm what my instincts were telling me. That evening, after Stephen had fallen asleep, I set up a small camera in our bedroom, hidden among the books on the shelf. I needed to know what was happening while I slept. The next morning, I could barely contain my anxiety as I reviewed the footage. For the first few hours, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I watched myself sleep peacefully beside Stephen. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding as the footage played out. My body, twisted and unnatural, crawled up the walls like some kind of grotesque creature. My breath caught in my throat as I watched. Stephen woke up looking up at me without a hint of surprise. He reached under the bed and pulled out a stick, using it to fend me off as I lunged at him from above. For the next hour, the two of us wrestled violently, though Stephen seemed to be the only one truly fighting. Finally, he managed to pin me down and cuff me to the bed, his face a mask of grim determination. The marks on my wrists suddenly made sense. The bruises, the pain, they were all because of this. I had been attacking him in my sleep, possessed by some force that I couldn't understand. I hadn't known. I hadn't realized it wasn't Stephen hurting me. It was me. Whatever dark force had taken over me at night. Tears streamed down my face as I rushed to find him. "Stephen! Stephen! I'm so sorry!" My voice cracked as I called for him, but there was no response. I searched the entire house, my heart racing faster with each passing second. The kitchen was empty, the living room quiet. "Stephen!" I screamed louder, panic rising as my voice echoed through the empty rooms. Where could he be? I checked the bathroom, the study. Nothing. The house felt unnervingly still, as if I were the only one left in it. My stomach twisted with fear. Something wasn't right. Then, I remembered the bedroom closet. I hadn't checked there yet. My hands shook as I reached for the handle, a sickening feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. Slowly, I opened the door. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the monster. It began like any other morning. I laced up my running shoes and took my usual route through the forest. The crisp air, the sound of leaves crunching beneath my feet. This was my sanctuary. Until today, I nearly stepped on it. A toad sitting eerily still in the middle of the path. I stopped just in time, crouching to get a closer look. Its back was studded with strange golden orbs. At first, I thought they were boils, swollen and ready to burst. Injury, perhaps? But no, the orbs seemed too deliberate, too alive. As I leaned in, the orbs began to sink, like marbles disappearing into the toad's flesh. The holes, deep, dark, and unnervingly round, began to expand. And then, from those grotesque pits, something emerged. I watched in horror as the sacks began to split, revealing grotesque limbs that unfurled with unnatural speed. Tadpoles? No, something worse, birthed directly from the toad's flesh. One of the creatures, slimy and malformed, launched itself onto my arm. I screamed, swatting at the tiny monster, but more of them sprang forth, latching onto my face, my neck. Their tiny, clawed limbs clung desperately to my skin. I could feel the cold, wet slime spreading as I tried to shake them off, but their grip was unyielding. My breaths came in panicked gasps as I clawed at my own skin. Finally, I managed to dislodge them, flinging their writhing bodies into the underbrush. Gasping and trembling, I stumbled home, my arms slick with their mucus. Red welts began to bloom across my skin. In the bathroom, I scrubbed myself raw. The hot water only intensified the burning sensation. I poured soap over every inch of my body, determined to erase the feeling of those things crawling on me. But no matter how much I scrubbed, the sensation lingered. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene. Those holes, those sacs, the vile creatures emerging from the depths. When I glanced at the bathroom sink, its drain, a simple circular opening, seemed to pulse. The tiles on the floor with their neat round patterns became a maze of voids. Every pore on my body seemed magnified. Even the tiny pores on my own skin seemed to gape at me, like miniature mouths ready to spew more horrors. I couldn't escape the imagery. Exhausted and desperate, I crawled into bed. I needed sleep, a reprieve from the madness clawing at my sanity. I forced myself to close my eyes and let the world fade away. But when I opened them again, it was there. I bolted upright, heart pounding, but the toad remained, unfazed by my panic. The toad stared at me with its unblinking eyes. Its presence was oppressive, its weight suffocating. My hands. It was my hands that made me freeze. They were slick, their skin darker, shinier. The dim light in my room distorted everything, but even in the shadows, I could see the unnatural sheen. "What did you do to me?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The toad spoke. Its voice was guttural, low, reverberating in my skull.
"I kissed you. You are my mate now. You have to give birth for me."
I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping in my haste. The mirror on the wall caught my eye, and I turned toward it. What I saw brought bile to my throat. My reflection was no longer human. My skin, now a sickly green-brown, was covered in a slick, mucus-like film. My hands were grotesquely webbed, my eyes bulging slightly from my skull. But worst of all was my back. Through the reflection, I saw golden orbs, the same orbs that adorned the toad, sprouting from my flesh. They pulsed, they quivered. Then, with a sickening pop, the orbs burst open, revealing the same deep holes. My body spasmed as tiny creatures, part human, part toad, began to emerge. Their grotesque forms wriggled free, flopping onto the floor. They called me mother. Dozens of them, no, hundreds, crawled out of me, each more hideous than the last. Their voices, a cacophony of screeches and croaks, filled the room. They climbed onto the bed, the walls, and eventually onto me. Their touch burned, their tiny claws sinking into my flesh. I couldn't scream. My throat was raw, my body overwhelmed. They swarmed me, their weight pressing me down. And as they chanted their grotesque refrain, I felt myself sinking, consumed by their slimy, writhing bodies. Darkness swallowed me. I woke to the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. My skin was raw, covered in red, itchy welts. A doctor stood over me, clipboard in hand.
"You've had an allergic reaction.
He explained, his tone clinical.
Probably from contact with a toad. You're lucky it wasn't worse."
Relief flooded through me. It was just a reaction, a nightmare fueled by fever and paranoia. But as I sat up, something caught my eye. Tiny, round holes had begun to form on my arm, and for a moment, I swore I heard a faint croak.
Sarah stepped into the room, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes were lined with deep black makeup, and her lips glistened a deep crimson. Tonight, she wasn't just Sarah, she was a vampire. The costume was simple, yet breathtaking. "Wow, you look amazing," I said, smiling. I set the knife down as I finished cutting the steaks for dinner, but I accidentally nicked my finger. A small line of blood oozed from the cut. Before I could react, Sarah was suddenly right next to me, her hand softly holding my wrist.
"Let me see."
She leaned in, her lips hovering just over the cut. I felt a little strange. Slowly, she brushed her lips against my skin, and then, gently, she licked the blood away. Sarah pulled back. her eyes narrowing. She stared at me for a moment before shaking her head.
Oh, negative?
She muttered under her breath.
You're not my type.
What did you say? Sarah smiled, wiping her mouth.
Don't worry about it. Let's eat.
Her tone was light, but something about the way she said it sent a shiver through me. I let it go, unsure if it was just part of the Halloween act. Later that evening, we headed to my friend Mark's Halloween party. The house was buzzing with energy. People in elaborate costumes, loud music, the smell of alcohol thick in the air. I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. Maybe it was the way Sarah had been acting, or maybe it was how she immediately gravitated toward the men in the room. She wasn't shy, but tonight, it felt different. She chatted easily with a group of guys, one after another. I watched Sarah as she leaned in close to them, her fingers brushing lightly against their arm, her lips close to their neck as if whispering something. Jealousy gnawed at my insides. She never acted like this around other men. I didn't want to be the possessive boyfriend and ruin the night with my insecurities. But my eyes kept drifting back to Sarah and the boys. Eventually, I slumped into a chair beside her and the man with blonde hair. She barely acknowledged me, her attention completely fixed on the blonde. His laugh grated on my nerves, and I could feel the alcohol muddling my thoughts, dulling my senses. I took another drink, then another, and before I knew it, the world around me blurred. When I woke up, the room was spinning. My head pounded, my mouth dry. I blinked groggily, trying to remember where I was. The party had died down. Most people were gone, the lights dimmed, but something was wrong. Broken glass crunched under my feet as I stood up. A bottle of wine lay shattered on the floor. I stepped closer, but my stomach churned. It wasn't wine. The dark red was thicker, more vivid. Blood. Panic surged through me, and I rushed to the bathroom to steady myself. I nearly vomited when I saw him. The blonde guy crumpled in the corner, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. 2 deep puncture wounds marred his throat. Blood smeared down his chest. I stumbled back, heart pounding wildly. Sarah. I had to find her. We had to get out of here. I searched the house, weaving through the aftermath of the party, but she was nowhere. My thoughts were racing. What had happened? Who did this? Finally, I spotted her. Through the sliding glass door, I saw Sarah walking arm in arm with someone toward the garden, the moonlight casting their shadows long across the lawn. I stepped outside, following them, my feet moving on instinct. I hid behind the garden wall, my heart racing in my chest. Slowly, I peeked around the corner and froze. Sarah was with a handsome man, but something was wrong. His body was limp, his head lolled to one side. Sarah held him close, her lips pressed against his neck. And then I saw it. She was drinking his blood. I gasped, the sound escaping before I could stop it. Sarah's head snapped up, her mouth dripping with blood, her eyes wild. The blonde man's body slumped to the ground, lifeless, his neck a mess of torn flesh and muscle. Sarah saw me. Then, in a blur of motion, she was upon me. I ran, hard in my throat, but she was too fast. She tackled me to the ground, pinning me down with inhuman strength. I braced myself, sure that this was the end. I could feel her breath on my neck, smell the coppery scent of blood. "Please," I whimpered. "Don't." She paused, her face inches from mine, her fangs glinting in the moonlight. She looked down at my hand, still cut from earlier, dried blood on my skin. Slowly, she smiled.
You don't need to be afraid. I told you before, you're not my type.
She wiped the blood from her mouth and with a slight laugh, added,
I mean your blood. Oh, negative. It's practically undrinkable.
I blinked up at her, too stunned to respond. She stood, offering me her hand as if nothing had happened. I hesitated but took it, allowing her to pull me up. We walked back to the house, her arm looped through mine as if we were just any other couple leaving a party. But inside, my mind was spinning. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Sarah was a real vampire and she dated me because my blood wasn't her type.